You are Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, our Locked On Hawks POSTCAST is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the infirmary is filling up again. We'll discuss the potential long-term impact. And as a DNP assigned, we'll discuss that and KTMG for the Rockets. But first, let's talk takes on how the Hawks hung in, but fell just short in a 100-92 loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves tonight. And Tate, you said your take was the identity showed up.
It was. And you know what? This is one of the more proud games, right? Mm-hmm. We always talk about how, no, we don't do that on this program. We're not here trying to treat losses like wins and moral victories and everything like that. There's probably only once or twice during the season when I could typically kind of say, I'm okay with calling this one a moral victory without calling it a moral victory kind of thing. And that's kind of how it made me feel when you start factoring in that they have probably about 80 plus points of their scoring that's not active on tonight. And I don't know if my math is correct on that or not. I'm pretty sure that if you've seen tonight's roster, then you would probably just say, hey, I don't care what number you make up. That sounds about right to me. But they never stop fighting. And they've been competitive. And I think that, unless you've been kind of living under a rock, then, you would hear us say regularly how, that they stick to their bread and butter. They're, moving the ball around and kind of playing within the way that they play, having that identity and really just fighting that refuse to lose type of mentality. If we're going to lose, we're not going to fight, not just get punched, punching back, sometimes having to punch first. I thought this was a game in which I really believe that some of my keys was the first one is to pray, right? Just being really transparent. Not just because of the injuries, but Minnesota has been a team that got off to a really rough start after coming off of a Western Conference Finals. And now all of a sudden they act like they want to play a little bit better and they're pretty much healthy for the most part, where Atlanta's not. So that was one of the first things. And then I think the other thing for Atlanta that was important was to pretty much, I just call it spray. Just shooting that ball from three. If there was a night that that you wanted to be competitive, and which they didn't do all that well on tonight, only shot 28%, but still was able to keep it within I think 2 possessions or 3 possessions.
Yeah, for most of the game. Yeah.
That pretty much says something that you didn't have to just rely on the 3-point shooting for this team. I thought they definitely needed to minimize the turnovers. That was the one that they didn't do. 22 in tonight's game, but they just stuck to the fundamentals, the basics. They got after loose balls, second chance points, and again, the ball movement. And they were I think that they play with some pride. And you know what? As you know, what I always say, I am okay with that. I don't care how much better the team is on the other side on paper or on the floor. If you're going out there and you're competing, then I'm good with that. And I think that we also kind of learned some about tonight, just a little bit. One of those people that say, oh, the Atlanta Hawks, I've seen the box score. I watched a couple of the highlights and just looked at the box score after the game. They got, their butts kicked. They lost. But you might have learned something about this team. This kind of tells you who's been watching games and who hasn't.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think there's a lot to be said about the resilience that you saw tonight and the fact that Quinn Snyder had this team ready, this particular squad that took the floor tonight. They were prepared. And I think for them, that's important because we don't know. And we'll go in depth more about this in the second segment. But real talk, we don't know when we look at the list of players who are out tonight, the list of players who've been in and out of the lineup for the Hawks, how much longer it's going to be this up and down, back and forth uncertainty with their lineup, especially the starting lineup. So it's good to see that, not just during that Chicago Bulls game, for example, but here we go again where you're inserting players from the bench into the starting five. You're inserting players from the G League onto the bench and the starting five, and you're actually getting some positive return. So I do think we're not here saying attaboy to an L. An L is still an L, and we recognize that the Hawks lost tonight. We're certainly not trying to sugarcoat that, but what we are saying is you got to continue to look at the bigger picture and see what something like this could mean. Because the other thing is this: after you've taken 5 straight L's with what you did before you took those 5 straight L's, you've got to find something positive to take away from tonight's game. Because, man, DeShaun, this might be a long stretch. This might be a long stretch for us. But my take for tonight was in my Kendrick Lamar voice, because it just kept playing in my head when I saw some of these tweets. I kept hearing, turn the TV off, turn the TV off. And I was like, okay, why y'all want to turn the TV off? And then I'm like, oh, they want to turn it off because they're looking at the lineup and saying, well, why should we watch this game? Because there's no Trey, there's no Dyson Daniels, there's no Jalen Johnson, etc. Well, it's for the very reason that DeShaun just said, because you were down those 3 starters. And just because, DeShaun, I do like math. So in looking at the math of the 3 starters who were out, Trey Young, 22.8 points per game. Jalen Johnson, 18.9 points per game. Dyson Daniels, 13.5 points per game. So essentially, you're looking at about 53 points gone.
Easy.
And that's just what they average. That doesn't take into consideration when Trey has one of those knockdown nights, or when Jalen is on one inside, or when Dyson Daniels is playing his perfect 2-way game. So if you lose an average of 53 points tonight, that would make the average person say, thanks, but no thanks. I'll catch the Hawks Tuesday night when they're back home and they're playing the Rockets. But tonight, I think this squad in their entirety actually showed you that there was something to watch. And if I can just say this as well, you're talking about Onyeka Okongwu, in the starting lineup. Welcome back, Zaccharie Risacher, returning to the starting lineup. David Roddy in the starting lineup. Keaton Wallace, and rounding that out with Beat Krejci. And then you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves and their starting lineup. Julius Randle, starter. Jaden McDaniels, starter. Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards. Pretty much sounds like their starting 5 was intact tonight. And yet, the Hawks found themselves in a position, even at the end of the game with 20 seconds left, 20.2 seconds to be exact, they were still within reach. I think that it was about 6 points. So like you said, 2 possessions right there, coming back from a 17-point deficit to possibly upset these Minnesota Timberwolves tonight. I think that is something to be proud of.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, listen, I also think that, games like this is good for just situations potentially in the future. Hopefully nobody goes down or gets injured, but God forbid if, you're in a win to get in situation, or advance to the next round, and someone's in foul trouble. You need somebody that has had some kind of experience. Nobody wants to be asking a guy, hey, get your butt in there from the end of the bench and try and put him in the game, and he hasn't seen any action in over 40 something games. Like, that's not the situation here. So I think that's something that helps. And then, I mean, listen, you got a guy like, you're looking at the starting lineup, like the guys you just mentioned. Everybody are guys that come off of the bench, or hardly even that. I mean, you've got Zaccharie Risacher, who's the only consistent starter, and this is his first game back, I think. So, I mean, considering all things, I think that I think it's clear that we know what needs to happen. Guys need to get healthy, and that the front office, I really hope, has their minds set on something. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later on the show, but there has to be someone to kind of fill voids, because this isn't the first time we're having conversations like this with this team. So, I don't know, Tenitra. I did take a look at something, and this is just in comparison to what Minnesota did on last night in a big win. Or last game in a big win against Denver, right? So they had 72 points in the paint. Now, again, remember, this is a Minnesota team that's coming off of this statistics. 72 points in the paint against Denver the other night. Well, guess what? They had 38 points in the paint on tonight. Then from an assist standpoint, that was their season high against Denver. They had 38 assists. Tonight, they had 18 assists. The Hawks had 24. When you start looking at the bench points, Minnesota had 42 bench points the other night in that win. The Hawks held their bench to 7 points off of the bench on tonight. And then last but certainly not least, a 40-point first quarter. That's where they was able to get out to a really hot start against Denver. Only 28 against the Hawks on tonight. And I'm sure Denver was a lot more healthy than the Hawks was. So maybe the Atlanta Hawks, I like to think of it more so of the fact that just the defense just came to play, and maybe Minnesota was just hot that last game. But yet still, I take any dub in any kind of statistical category when we're rolling this kind of lineup out.
Yeah, when you're rolling it out, because the infirmary is filling up again. We'll talk about that in the and one. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, will it be the Kansas City Chiefs? Will it be the Philadelphia Eagles? Calling the MVP, Saquon Barkley, or Patrick Mahomes, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate because who knows? Jalen Hurts might be that guy. He might be him come Super Bowl Sunday. So knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, DeShaun, this seems like a broken record for us, but the broken record has stopped for a minute, right? And we were actually playing a song consistently. And then all of a sudden, the broken record feels like it's coming back these last, say, 5 games. And maybe, there's no coincidence that the Hawks have now dropped 5 straight when you look at the players who were out and the number of games that those players were out. So looking at that, it starts with the Knicks game, and then it's the Pistons game, and then it's back-to-back Toronto that we'd like to forget. And of course, then tonight, a close one, but nonetheless a loss to the Timberwolves. And you're looking, at Trae Young out, Jalen Johnson out, Dyson Daniels out. Good to see, like we said, Zaccharie Risacher back, but Larry Nance came back for 1 game and went out again. And of course, we'll talk about the late scratch Bogdan Bogdanovic a little bit later in the show. But Trae, Jalen, Dyson, how concerned are you that 3 of the starting 5 were out tonight?
I'm concerned. One reason being is because I think it was not too long ago, and forgive me because I don't remember exactly what game this was, but I know it was probably within the last maybe week or 2 or something along those lines. At least it felt like it was that recent. I felt like we saw something similar of this where, we did see Keaton Wallace stepping into the lineup, and we've seen some other guys that kind of had to stand in the gap and whatever, plug and play and what have you. So because it's not just necessarily a one-off type of deal. And if I'm just being honest, you still got other guys that I feel like are probably, without really knowing, of course, being forced to play. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Clint Capela is not 100%. He's not a guy that's in the starting lineup, but typically always is too. I'm glad to finally be able to see my dude Mohamed Gay come into being able to play, find somewhere in the rotation to be able to play. But you better believe, I feel like as long as I've been waiting for him to get on the Hawks floor, if they're calling him up, then they must be in some real deep trouble. So, but no, it definitely is concerning, and maybe that's one reason why I feel like it's a little extra. I give a bit of grace, right? Because of the way that they fought tonight, considering all things. I mean, as good as Onyeka Okongwu has looked in recent weeks, where he's had to step into that 5 role, I always kind of poke fun at him and tease him about being inconsistent. He's been relatively consistent as of late. If you would have told me that he was going to have 7 points and 7 rebounds on tonight, there's no way that I would have said Atlanta was only going to lose this game by 8 points, as good as he's been lately. So I think that there are some pluses and some negatives, but the problem here is that, number one, I don't think this is something that the Hawks can afford to sustain for a long period of time. Yeah. And even more so, it's really happening to the most, like, the biggest key contributors for this team. DeAndre Hunter being a big time scorer, Jalen Johnson being a big time scorer. I don't even need to talk really about Trae Young. Even Dyson Daniels, who has tipped in, tallied some stuff for the team and has been a big help contribution that we really didn't feel like we would be able to bank on. We've gotten used to that, and he was a scratch on tonight. So again, I think that it is a concern, not just because of how many guys, but the roles of the guys that are out and for the periods of time that you don't see them.
Yeah, and I think too, when you look at the severity of those injuries, right? Because when you look at Trae Young on January 23rd, it was right Achilles tendonitis. And then you come back and it's January 25th and it's right hamstring tightness. And then you look at tonight and again, it's right hamstring tightness. To me, that's what concerns me, because you're kind of the Achilles and the hammy, like those are potentially serious injuries if they get more severe. So I think that's what's concerning me as well, not just the players who were out and not just what we missed from them in this game, but what we could be missing for them for a stretch, because we're now five games into this thing, and you and I are still having this conversation about Trae. We're having this conversation about Jalen with this left shoulder injury, and nobody knows when he's expected to return. This is so undefined that it's scary on what's really going on with Jalen. And then, of course, like we said, with Dyson Daniels, started out the night questionable, but ended up being out with left ankle soreness. So, yeah, that concerns me. And Larry Nance, like I said, had the right hand surgery. Of course, sometimes it's injury management, if you will, but I still didn't like 1 game in, 1 game out.
Every little bit counts.
Yeah. I mean, but injury management for me would have felt more comfortable if he was just on the bench with some limited points, as opposed to injury management is, hey, I'm just not going to play at all. I think, that's when I get a little bit concerned about how serious should we take this? Like, how serious is this going to be, or is this becoming for this team? But, you got to give a shout out to, like they say, your best ability is your availability. And you got to give a shout out to Zaccharie Risacher returning to the lineup, 11 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, a couple steals. So that should be something that's encouraging. And Deandre Hunter was encouraging as well, because there is Dre, who was also listed as questionable, but the guy puts in some nasty work for somebody who was listed as questionable on the injury report. 35 points, a career high, 12 of 21 from the field, 4 of 8 from deep, 7 of 8 from the free throw line, getting Zaccharie back, getting DeAndre back. What they did tonight was really, really impressive as well.
And that ain't just against any team. This is a Minnesota team that's scratching and clawing to kind of somewhat get back to where they once were. I think it's, been really clear that, Anthony Edwards had some, comments over the course of the last couple of weeks. Kind of seems like he's like calling out his team or whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
And the interesting part about the injuries for the Atlanta Hawks right now is the fact that it ain't like we're just sitting back looking at the imaginary watch like, all right, 1 more game or just 2 more games. And then finally we get like 10 days off because of All-Star. They've still got like not only 8 or 9 more games left remaining before they can get to that point. One of them being a makeup game that they probably didn't realize they were going to have to account for. And then even more so on top of that is these aren't just against any old opponents. We're talking about Cleveland, who's looking at probably, I would imagine, really upset about the 2 losses they've taken out of their 8 to the Atlanta Hawks, looking for some revenge. You've also got a Houston Rockets team. I know we're going to talk about them in the next segment, who is just looking really good right now. And so, you still got a couple other teams who's looking pretty good. And some of them, the Atlanta Hawks have beaten already, and they don't forget. They remember what this was like. So they're going to look to take full advantage. But no, shout out to the Atlanta Hawks. Hopefully the medical staff can get these guys back right, because I just sure hope that this isn't going to be something that is lengthy and just a never-ending revolving door of injuries to star players for the team.
Yeah, and shout out to the G Leaguers as well, because they had a game last night, suited up in Birmingham, and they actually beat the Squadron. And then these guys came in for relief for Trey, for Dyson, for Jalen tonight. And you got to give credit, like you said, seeing Mogay out there at least was very encouraging. And I know there were a couple of times where he did his Mogay thing where he was getting rebounds in places and spaces that you wanted to see him get those in, that encouraged you, but also Keaton Wallace being inserted into that starting lineup and coming away with 13 points and 7 rebounds, a couple of steals. That was pretty, or 7 assists, 3 rebounds and a couple of steals. That was a pretty impressive night for him as well. So good to see that the development that's going down in College Park is actually paying some dividends when these guys are called up. Now, there was another DNP tonight. Is that a sign? We'll discuss that and KTMG for the Rockets in Who Got Next. So, DeShaun, this is that rumor mill time. That is where we are in the pantheon of conversation for the NBA, because February 6th is right around the corner. We're talking a week and a half to be exact. So this is one of those times that's been intriguing, because we've been talking about whether or not the injuries to the front court were going to dictate what Landry Fields might do at the trade deadline, or whether not having a backup point guard for Trae Young with Kobe Buffkin down for the season, whether that would still dictate things. So everybody is kind of coming into that space of the rumor mill, and oh my God, Bogdan Bogdanović was a late, beyond late scratch tonight, as social media went wild. Literally, what is trending right now on X is Hawks trades. And at the top of that conversation is Bogdan Bogdanović. So it harkened back for me to this game, I think it was against the Lakers last season, where DeJounte Murray, I think, was a late scratch, came out in street clothes, and everybody was like, well, that is the team that they said he was being traded to. So maybe he came out in street clothes because he's going to go back to LA with them. So I just had to have a little fun with that and ask you if that was one of those things, given tea leaves energy about what this Hawks team is going to do, or not do, but do at the trade deadline.
I don't know it kind of feels like it. And I mean, if I'm just being honest, I don't know how many consecutive years, and maybe it's not as many as I kind of think that it is, that I feel like at the beginning of the season, we just don't see Bogey. I understand that this year kind of was a little bit different, because we also understand that he had played a lot of basketball. Obviously, that includes the Olympics and all the other kind of stuff, representing the country and whatever else. But I also feel like I've just seen the playing time diminish, even in the moments when he was in street clothes. And, we kind of talk sometimes about him being a defensive liability. Sometimes I don't feel like that shot is falling as much or consistently as it once was either. And there's so many different things. So yes, certainly we've heard his name come up a couple times. Maybe not as much as we heard DeJounte Murray's around this time a year ago, but I feel like a couple times we've heard Bogey's name kind of come up. And if you go all the way back to when he first became an Atlanta Hawk, and I think that was the first year that he that his first year was the year that they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I remember at that moment, towards the beginning and middle of that season, the reason why a lot of people didn't see the Atlanta Hawks doing what they did in the postseason is because how many injuries the Atlanta Hawks had at that time. And he was a big, huge piece to some of the injuries that they had. And it just seems like that has never really went away very much. Would hate to see him go for sure. But if this is a team that can still get better on defense And this is decisions that, Landry can show me that he can make as I'm putting a little bit more trust and faith in, especially with the Dyson Daniels and all that stuff coming over. Then it's something I wouldn't totally mind entertaining, but they don't have a ton of really good shooting on this team, and you are talking about subtracting a really good shooter from it.
Yeah, but the really good shooter whom you mentioned, the question is where that guy go, because and it could be more injury laden than we realize, but Bogey shooting 37% from the field, Bogey averaging 10 points a game, like as much as he is or has been a sharpshooter for this team, I can't tell you that it's impressive for me for him to essentially be shooting 24.6% from three. Like that's not what the Hawks need. And I think we all love Bogey. I mean, the whole caw that calling in response that you get for the Hawks, he came up with that. So he's very much loved and beloved in this city. But the reality is you've got to decide, Landry Fields, if there is a way to package a deal such that you can fill 1, 2, or all 3 of the areas of concern, which would be that front court. That's an area of concern with Jalen Johnson going down and Clint Capela not being 100%. And we don't know if you're going to get more good 00 or not so good 00. So that's the piece. Or, like I said, getting that backup point guard for Trey. And then the final piece that we didn't talk about before is getting that sharpshooter. Now, Garrison Matthews, hey, he gives Gary Bird energy a lot. So you've got a piece there. But I feel like there needs to be a complementary piece. I don't think one sharpshooter coming off the bench is going to be enough for this team. I think they need another sharpshooter. But again, it depends on how much wheeling and dealing Landry Fields can do to fill 1, 2, or 3 of those areas of concern.
Let me ask you this, Tenitra, and I'm not saying for Bogey straight up. I'm not saying in a package. I'm just curious, right? Would you be willing to entertain? And I don't even know what comes along with this hypothetical.
Yeah. Right. We're saying minus contract limitations or restrictions. We're throwing that out for now.
Would you be open to entertaining a player in which I know you probably don't love where he went to school, but would you be interested in entertaining a player like a Brandon Ingram here? Because what you do get in a situation like that is you don't necessarily get a primary front court player, but you don't really get a primary like ball handler, but you do get a front court player and you do get a back court player at the same time kind of thing. And you're looking for somebody who's kind of trying to, revive their careers again to whatever degree. And again, it's just a total hypothetical and just something I'm just curious about because he's bringing some scoring. He's going to help you get closer to what you're trying to get. You love length, you love athleticism, you love potential, you love defense. And I know he's kind of, I'll just say looks lazy. Let's just put it that way. That's the best way I can put it sometimes. But I really think that if he's got, the right kind of running mates with him and so forth in a city that can really embrace him and his style of play, and I don't know. It's just something that I think is worth thinking about and considering if you really want to try and come away with a boom if you're the Atlanta Hawks. And let's just be honest. When it comes to trade deadlines and when it comes to free agency, the Atlanta Hawks are typically not the ones that make the most noise. So I don't think that would be a bad idea. Yeah.
You wish that the conversation would be similar to what the conversation was with the Dallas Mavericks at the trade deadline last year and their run ultimately to the NBA Finals with the New York Knicks and the moves that they made that allowed them to get deeper into the postseason. The biggest challenge with Brandon Ingram is injuries because the high ankle sprain has kept dude out for 7 weeks. And I just don't know if you know what you're going to get. Now, that said, the Hawks did take a chance on Clint Capela because he came here with that toe injury, was on the squad in February 4 or 5 years ago, and ultimately never played that season, but ended up being quite a good addition. So I know there are players that can come to you that are injured that you take a chance on, but I don't know about Brandon Ingram
that one.
That particular injury. I don't know. But I would say a Brandon Ingram like player.
Okay.
Yes.
I like that. I like that. And like I said, just a guy who, can play multiple positions. I think that's one of the biggest keys. And again,
it is.
Does that still address your backup point guard situation? No, it doesn't. But when things get situational and you need a ball handler, not so much a point guard, prototypical, natural born and bred, I think that it's going to be very highly critical for them that if they do try and make a move on whomever that may be, that it could be someone that they can plug and play into a bunch of different spots and they can start changing up rotations and confuse oppositions with the homework that they try to do on the Hawks.
Yeah, and let me just make this general comment before we go to the KTMGs. When you look at what Quinn Snyder was able to do in essentially making Rudy Gobert an all-star, because now we all wonder, like, how is he the fourth-time defender of the year again? Like, he ain't even that dude. But Quinn Snyder helped to build him into that. And when we look at what he's done with Onyeka Okongwu, encouraging him to evolve his game, Jalen Johnson and what he's been able to do with unlocking his potential, I just think that there's an opportunity there for a guy like a Brandon Ingram, where it's like you said, might not be your true point guard, but a Brandon Ingram-like guy who's versatile and can go across positions and can handle the ball, which Jalen Johnson and Double O have gotten better at this year. I think you could take a chance on that kind of player, even though he might not fit into one specific position like that of point guard. But speaking of tomorrow night, like you mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, we had a snowstorm in Atlanta that shut down the Hawks-Rockets game on a Saturday afternoon. So the Rockets are coming back tomorrow night. And you would hope, hey, they're coming on a back-to-back. Hawks are coming on a back-to-back. Maybe that'll be a positive for the Hawks, until you look at what the heck the Rockets have been doing in this season. Ime Udoka has those guys playing some high-level ball. So what do the Hawks do when they come back to State Farm Arena tomorrow to end this losing streak and give the Rockets an L?
Well, hopefully ball protection. Definitely can't afford to be turning the ball over because,
true.
They've got a lot of young guys that like to get out and transition. They like to run, and they're super confident right now. I think one of the biggest question marks for them was, the coaching situation. They're obviously really well coached. And a little bit of a good mixture of experience to go along with the youthful guys, and youthful guys are kind of in a position where they're being forced to grow up after acquiring some experience on that team, some guys that are going to be leaders in the locker room. Maybe they don't score as many points or what have you as some of the Jalen Greens and some of the young guys that they have on this team. But I think the primary thing is really going to be preventing from turning the ball over. Obviously, just continuing to do all the little things, just continue to be scrappy, continue to play the game in which, don't allow the opposition to get you to change your style of play or, play into their hands or what have you. And then the other thing is just, it's really a lot of it is going to rely on the defense. Only so much of that you're really going to be able to stop them with what Houston is doing right now. But the Atlanta Hawks is always and forever, as of this year anyways, a team that I just really don't like counting out when they're considered to be an underdog role.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, they are a team that has shown us multiple times this year. We don't like when they play down to their competition, but man, have they shown us some things when they play up to their competition. And just like the Rockets had some close games and they were able to take out Cleveland 2 days in a row or 2 games in a row, they took out the Celtics. The Hawks have shown that as well, because guess who also took those same 2 teams out? The Atlanta Hawks. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. So remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We will see you tomorrow night.